Hello, and welcome to this siberXchange CISO panel. Today, we're going to be talking about the pandemic, contactless commerce, security, and all the elements that go into the security considerations across our companies. My name is Jonathan Nguyen. I'm a Vice President and Field CISO at Fortinet. I'm joined by a great panel of security folks today. And so I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'm going to go around the table, introduce the team, let them talk a little bit about themselves, their roles, their perspectives and experiences. And then we're going to go into a series of questions that'll make the next hour pretty fast flowing. So again, many thanks for your time. My name is Jonathan Nguyen, and I'm at Fortinet. And my role as a field CISO is really to apply the 25 odd years I've had in cybersecurity, the experiences I've had at a Fortune 20 MSSP, and I was there for about 16 years. In my last role, there was a security CTO where my team ran that Verizon data breach investigations report. So the culmination of about 12,000 odd data breaches and looking at the root cause of those data breaches exposes you to a lot of mistakes that organizations make and some of the fallacies in cybersecurity. And my job is to take those lessons learned and help apply that to help get cybersecurity right. And the biggest challenge has been into this pandemic. It's just accelerated all the pain points and all the problems and all the systemic and structural issues that I've seen. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But in the meantime, I want to go around and let the various panelists introduce themselves and give perspectives from where they sit on their experience points. So the first one is Mohsen Azari. Mohsen, I'll let you start off.
Sure, thank you, Jonathan. My name is Mohsen Azari. I lead the security practices for Walmart Canada. I've been in this role for almost 10 years now. I've had a variety of other leadership roles with other organizations. So the main, obviously main part of my role is to ensure that the proper strategy for both the internal, external, cloud, and the enterprise security, both on the short term and long term, is sounded and properly put in place. The pandemic, as Jonathan mentioned, yes, it has accelerated a lot of things that we do, and we take our time to achieve the results. So one of the things that we are noticing that the speed and agility is basically replacing the perfection. So what I mean by that is rather than going on the long journey of doing long projects, we are now doing incremental projects that based on the type of the requirement that comes to us from customer facing or from the internal associate, making sure that we can attend to those problems as quickly as possible. So it has been a very exciting time for all of us at the retail sector. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Hey, Sherry Rumbolt, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm actually in Whistler, BC, enjoying the sunshine, a little bit of hiking. Awesome. So my name is Sherry Rumbolt. I'm a National Information Security Officer with the Department of National Defense. Spent 22 years in uniform before taking that one off and putting on a different hat. But I worked in a lot of the public sector in different roles, and went back to national defense a few years back and joined a team being a senior information security officer on the West Coast. And now I'm working at the national level for the Director of National Defense in security. And my role is to help secure the largest network that we actually have for national defense. So some fun times, especially in the middle of this pandemic, and how to effectively get a large amount of military folks back to work efficiently, and being able to continue on with the operations that we do around the world as well as in Canada.
Well, that's awesome, Sherry. It's funny. We may have changed uniforms, but we're still standing post, right?
Absolutely, we are.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your service. Looking forward to the conversation. Hey, Bil Harmer, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, former Canadian, doing my route through the U.S., enjoying the heat down here. I think we're tapping 107 today. I'm currently the chief evangelist and CISO for a company called SecureOp. We handle identity and access management, the authentication side of the house. And what we're finding out now is the key to unlocking a lot of the digital transformation that companies have gone through. I've probably spent the better part of the last 20 years in software as a service in some form, specifically security and privacy. And really, I spend a lot of my time helping people understand why they need to change the way they think, the way they address issues, the way they approach things. I will be the first to say, I don't care what software you buy mine, buy somebody else's. We've all got good stuff, but please change the way you think about things. And if we can come out of today with some new ideas and some altered opinions maybe, or altered views on the approach, and as Mohsen said, taking speed and agility over perfection, that type of thing is absolutely fundamental to how we come out of this on the other end.
Well, I know you are transitioning now into the American way because you speak in Fahrenheit rather than centigrade. So, yeah, congratulations.
Sounds way hotter at 107 than 32.
My friends told me I was an honorary Canadian because I went there 14 times last year. And then I started speaking metric. I understood kilometer per hour. And so I get it. That's a subtle but amazing tell that you definitely are moving towards being a Texan now.
Absolutely. All hat, no ranch.
Right? So John Bernard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Great. Good.
So my name is John Bernard. I'm the Chief Information Officer for an organization called Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority. We are a nonprofit government regulator for the Ontario government in the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Our primary role, or only role actually, is to regulate industry in ensuring that they are meeting their environmental mandates that are set out by the Ontario government. I've been in IT for longer than I'd like to admit, 30 plus years in various roles. Started out as a programmer and worked my way up. I've worked in pharma. I've worked for one of the largest retirement home companies in Canada. I've worked for IT research, and now working arm's length with the government. We are relates to the pandemic because we implemented a new system. We implemented Salesforce 3 years ago. We have a mandate that, or I've set a mandate that our organization is moving everything to the cloud, most of which is already there. So it actually made it fairly simple to transition. We have all of our staff use laptops, so we weren't scrambling to go and buy a bunch of equipment on March 16th when everybody moved to work from home. But I think the biggest thing for us right now is we set this out originally under the assumption that it could be a couple of weeks, could be a month. We had no idea how long it was going to last. And we were a 100% in the office shop that everybody worked from the office. That'll never happen again. And so now we're looking at this at a longer term as to, we have the measures we put in place are very secure at the moment. But as Mohsen was saying, do it fast, not necessarily right, or not the best solution, but the fastest solution to get you up and running. Now we're able to take a bit of a breath and say, okay, now what do we need to change to make sure that this is going to work for the long haul?
Wow, that's great. I'm hearing a lot of that across conversations I've had with your peers, is that the big adrenaline rush is over now, and now it's time to stop, take a breath, and reflect upon what's going to be this new normal. What's that going to look like, and how do we go from here? Congratulations on being a cloud and digital first strategy before all this. I'm hopeful that your pain points were not too severe.
No, it was actually pretty painless, and yeah, we were thankful that we were already in the cloud. So yeah, it was.
So are you in your home office today, or are you actually in?
No, I'm in my home office.
Awesome. Well, good for you. All right. So let's start off. I'll describe the first question. I'll take a stab at it, and then I'll go back in the same order and let you all answer that. Okay. So the first question is this: the pandemic has brought the question of control. It's kind of paradoxical because at the heart of all CISOs, CISOs, and there's a little control freak that wants to get his or her arm around everything, and no matter what happens, it's a very dynamic environment. One of the most telling things I've seen over the last 15 weeks in conversations with folks like yourselves has been just how little control we have and how much things are changing. You mentioned, John, with regards to things will never be the same again. The nature of how we work. So work is more what we do rather than a place we commute to and from. I think industrial psychology is going to change completely. The old sort of industrial psychology where you have to be at your desk no later than 9 a.m. and you can leave no earlier than 5 p.m. is kind of an irrelevant metric right now. And that we're really rethinking our ways of measuring productivity. And so when it comes to control, in regard to cloud security, my first assessment is that now we are much more of a digital enterprise. And all of you seem to have said that your organizations across the board, public sector, private sector, are much more digital than ever. And to me, it's really about having visibility, and from visibility, awareness, from awareness, control. Because control without any of the other two really makes no sense. You can be doing all types of mitigation steps that have no bearing upon the actual security or resilience of your organization. I think that in order to have control, you must do those basic blocking and tackling, those really mundane tasks that are not pleasant to do. For me, I'm going to answer this by saying what is often underappreciated is the data classification and process classification steps. Understanding where your critical assets are, what the underlying dependencies are, who the people are, and from there, being able to formulate a risk management strategy that's appropriate, whether you're on-prem, you're in a cloud, your own data centers. What I'm seeing is that security has to be on a whole bunch of edges that are appearing now. And, it's public information. The CMO at our organization has SD-WAN in his home because he's got to have redundant ISP connections for bandwidth. He's got to have, because he's the face of the business, he's got to have great resilience in the network, bandwidth availability, low jitter, high reliability, right? Because he's got fiduciary and elevated trust. He also has to have security on that home edge. And then that same edge, whether it's in the LAN, WAN, or the cloud, all have to be integrated. So I would say before we think about control, my biggest recommendation is make sure you understand what it is you have, the nature of its criticality, the risk associated with that, and then try to apply appropriate controls and security. And the last thing I would do is look at technology. So often is the case, I think my biggest mistake coming through the ranks was I was a technologist and we wanted to get that technology in place first, right? So enough of my answers. Mohsen, you represent a brand that is great for my family. So why don't you tell us about, from Walmart Canada, right? Your perspectives on what it means about control and not just cloud security, but any element of cybersecurity and contactless commerce, because you more than anybody else, I think, on board here, has to execute contactless commerce. And I'm sure you guys are rethinking and reimagining, your retail model, right?
Absolutely. So, I would basically reiterate all the things that you just mentioned about data classification, about the risk assessment. And one a couple of things that I would add to that is, yes, we have always had a cloud strategy, a cloud security strategy that, sometimes we actually stretch ourselves a little bit thin towards, multiple clouds, and then that the visibility and the management of the multiple clouds actually becomes that much more difficult. One thing that we've noticed, since the pandemic, we are starting to actually bring a lot of those multi-cloud and into focus, and starting to pay attention to narrow down where we're actually going to put our most sensitive data, rather than going with 1, 2, 3, 4 cloud and being restricted to managing a multiple platform and potentially have the problem of locking in. We are now actually narrowing down to just 1 or 2 for the more sensitive type of a data that we have. This has allowed us to be able to manage and control much better a relationship, our assets that actually resides on the cloud. So obviously another aspect of that would be how the cloud would the legacy application that, as with any other organization would have, they play a part into migration to the cloud. So before the pandemic, we had a steady flow of migration of the legacy apps into the cloud. What we are doing now, we are actually prioritizing which one are less risky to move into the cloud. So based on what you just mentioned about the data classification, about the assessing the risk and prioritizing, where the most risks actually reside, we completely retuned our cloud strategy to do exactly that. So I would say, if I had to summarize it, would be, rather than going with multiple cloud, we are narrowing down the number of the cloud providers and potentially go with one primary partner. And then the second one is the making sure that we do address the risk and mitigate the high risk one, hopefully within the organization, and move the lower risk one as quickly as we can to the cloud. One other thing, as with all the retailers that I'm sure you have noticed, there is the urgency of people working from home, people being at home. They would like to place the order. They would like to get their goods and material, just from the comfort of their home. So that has actually put a lot of stress on many of the cloud provider, many of the retailers. So subsequently, our supply chain and the cloud has been magnified. All the issues, the potential issues, has been magnified, and we had to ramp up special team to start escalating those issues and make sure that the supply chain that we have as a backend to our cloud is sound and well and can accommodate those additional requests hitting our e-commerce sites.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. The notation I heard from one of your peers in retail was that they're measuring the amount of time that it takes for a response from your website to the consumer. And they're saying that if it's greater than 2 seconds, the likelihood that they're going to drop and move to another vendor is about 95%. And
very much so. Very much so.
Wow. So control and speed at the same time. Awesome. Sherry, you've got such a great background in your particular remit today. You've got all levels of criticality and security at a national level in the defense perspective. Talk about control. What does it mean when you've got so many responsibilities, and what does that mean for control as we move to a cloud first and digital strategy?
Well, I think that, everybody knows that defense, as far as our classification of data and all these other things and protecting our information, it's pretty tried and true. We're very mature in those areas. But then, when we have a pandemic such as what we just had, how do we, get everybody back to work in an efficient, effective manner and maintain operational missions across the world and still be able to get, I would say, our services provided in an efficient manner. So it was quite an interesting challenge, I would say, because we're traditionally not a big cloud house, and we do have applications and all that stuff, and then we've been piloting O365 and a few other things, but we quickly onboarded about 30,000 people, in a very, very short time. Wow. And now, as you said, and as others alluded to, we're not going back to the model that we had before. So when it comes to control, I know especially probably for public servants and also probably government and military, having eyes on is always a very good thing. Especially eyes on employees and eyes on everything that's happening. I think everybody thinks that there's a perceived control there, that as long as you can see people and see what's happening around you, you can control it. I think sometimes that's a bit of a misnomer, but anyway, that's okay. I think that we're all moving into uncharted territory. And it's actually very, very interesting to look at the whole psychological aspects of how we actually do business and how we're actually doing our work now, and then maintaining efficient operations. So, a little bit of a diverse change for us. Thankfully, like many, we had a lot of remote work opportunities already in place, but then how to do that a little bit more effectively across a large organization took it's taken some time, but we're effectively rolling that out quickly. But again, too, due to classification of data, we can only go to cloud for certain things, not everything.
Yeah, I think the notion of control has certainly changed, especially as this notion of being a knowledge worker has really become apparent. And it harkens back to one of my first job experiences, coming out of Foreign Service Institute into the US government and showing up in the office, and everyone was arrayed, literally hierarchically in front of a door where the director sat and could see us all, right? And I think, Bill, you epitomize the notion of what a knowledge worker is, right? And you seem to be an itinerant knowledge worker, and you travel from country to country. Give us your thoughts about digital transformation, this cloud adoption, and what does control mean in this environment today?
Sure. First and foremost, for anybody that's ever heard me say this, I hate the term cloud. I truly do, because, I listen to Mohsen, and I immediately have 6 questions because I want to dig into what he's talking about to get specific. When you hear software as a service, infrastructure as a service, you start to get a better understanding of what you're getting, how you're getting it. I've been in this area for longer than I care to remember at times. And some of the things that we're touching on, things like asset management is so, as you mentioned, so incredibly important, all the way down to, and this is where I think the security people tend to forget and walk away. Why? Why do we have that data? Why is it important to our organization? How much risk does it pose to us? Because we as security people tend to operate on the premise of, give me a problem, I'll give you a solution. We all have to work from home starting Monday. Okay, let me build up my VPN technology, bang, 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 and I start building up solutions for it. And that's why we pile things on. You mentioned SD-WAN, which is a really interesting technology that's been coming out over the it's been more adopted in the last 3-4 years. Yeah. And that whole notion of security anywhere, anytime. Yep. And I think the pandemic has simply caused us to base jump off the cliff of safety, if you will. We were doing this. Digital transformation was creating a blur between the work-life balance. There is no work-life balance. You find a way to live a balanced life, and that's all you can do. Yeah. You get to go out and choose. It's not the 9 to 5 anymore. It's 12 hours a day, but I get to go take my son to school in the morning or pick him up in the afternoon. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years, simply because that's how I've always operated. Having the luxury of working in the startup world, I was able to do that. When I went to Manulife Financial, absolutely not. Suit and tie, show up in the office, and still work from home. They were kind of, insistent on things like that. But these are the topics that security people do tend to forget. We tend to forget about the psychological effects, the human aspect of what we do, and we tend to miss the problems. So as we look at what's happening, for instance, the millennials, we get to blame the millennials for a lot of stuff, and we're going to blame them for some more stuff as well. The world of instant gratification, right? That 2-second rule is so important in the retail industry online, because, what is it? When Google came out with their piece where they would push anybody who didn't have SSL by default to the second page of Google search, who goes to the second page of Google search? Yeah. Nobody. That's like some bin in the back of the store that nobody goes to, right? There's no reason to be there. And that's what we're all about. It's instant gratification. It's instant access. And as security professionals, when we do that pile on response, add something, we have done that across the board, not only to our users and their workflows, but to ourselves as well. Everything from, your authentications through to your processes for doing things. So we have to start looking at almost decoupling that, learning what our business does, why they do it, why those assets are important to us, why that user journey is critical. Why does the Department of Defense say no to cloud? Because, right? There's a reason for it somewhere in there, whether it's legislative, an emotional gut call, somebody misinterpreted something. I don't know why, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm sure Sherry does. But those are the things that need to be articulated. So that way, when the other people that we're talking to are helping us make those decisions, plan our strategies and understand it, they are very clear. Nomenclature, lexicon, the whole bit is so critically important to the decisions we make. Sorry, that was a weird, long-winded, but this is what the pandemic did. It just went poof, deal with it all right now. Yeah. And that's where we're sitting. How do we deal with these things?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing a lot from CISOs, is that some things have changed forever and some things haven't changed. Work from home, remote working, digital transformation, the business models are all changing, but the business objectives haven't changed. The revenue objectives haven't changed. The public trust, the mission hasn't changed for Sherry and the other public sector folks. But what has also been added now is this notion of that user or customer experience. And they're telling me that the business outcome and those experiences metrics are almost more important than those traditional KPIs of mean time to detection, mean time to response, true, false, positive rates. So yeah, everything has changed. By the way, I love the Predator paraphernalia behind you. That's really awesome.
Huge movie fan. I build all of these in my spare time.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, we have to talk. I'm building my skills and using foam and creating things like that. So we have some things in common. So John, your element and how you go about it. What are your thoughts about control now? Because you had that digital first strategy, that cloud first strategy. How did you frame the idea of control as you built the strategies?
Well, I will say that you're right. We got lucky because we started out cloud first, and I won't say we're not 100% cloud, but all of our key systems are cloud. And because of the fact that we have registrant data, there is a high requirement, not only by the government, but by the people that we regulate, to ensure that their data is secure. And so security first, it was security by design as we built our systems. And so moving into the pandemic, moving to work from home, really that was one piece that we didn't have to worry about because we'd already built it. Where we ran into, I'll call them headaches or roadblocks, was that we now had to look at 100% of our staff that have now gone from working in the office to working anywhere. And so we needed to make sure that we had an ample level of security in place to prevent anybody else from getting into those systems that we only wanted our own staff to get into. And I mean, we did some simple things like, our Salesforce access has always been IP address restricted. So you could only access it through the IP address at our office. We've done some things that tie in VPN access, but you're still coming in through the office. And so there's a few things like that we've put in place that help to ensure that that we still have control over who is going in. We still do on-prem authentication, so we still have an Active Directory server that that people have to authenticate to when they get into our local network before they go out to Salesforce or any of our other systems. So it's kind of added an extra layer of security. And I know Sherry talked about that they're moving to O365. We've actually moved to Office 365 for all of the applications. We're in the process of moving to Active Directory and those types of things online. But for now, it works the way that we've got it set up. But it is definitely a concern, and it's always something that we have to watch out for. Yeah. And I just wanted to throw out a comment. Bill, you had made a comment about that you hate the word cloud. And there's a thing that I've seen on LinkedIn and a number of other places that says there is no such thing as cloud. It's just somebody else's computer.
Oh yeah. And we have just recreated the mainframe days using the internet as the transport mechanism. That's
right.
all.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember what was 5 years ago, I was on a panel at RSA and we got into a heated discussion between me and another quote evangelist. And I said, you realize that the platform infrastructure and software as a service is just outsourcing computing. It is somebody else's infrastructure, right? And they're like,
That's
no, the cloud is not outsourcing. I was like, okay. I come from an service provider environment. I got an idea of what that looks like. So it's interesting we've come full circle on that. So, wow, that was the first question, okay? And we're almost at 28 minutes into this. You guys are awesome. We should be all drinking wine and doing something sophisticated, right? Second question is near and dear to all of our hearts. It deals with identity and access management because of remote working and how that has shifted how your organization is handling IAM. And that. So I'll take a first stab at that. I think it's the last couple of years since the OPM breach, zero trust has gotten a big buzz, right? Because the US government said that would have prevented that type of a data breach, which I was a victim of, by the way. Everything you could possibly want to know about me is floating around somewhere, including myself and my in-laws and my health information, all of that. And it was posited back in 2009 by Forrester, which is the idea that you should trust traffic inside the perimeter no more than traffic outside the perimeter, right? What has really changed, though, is that most of us now are outside the perimeter. It's kind of interesting.
Right.
It took the pandemic to drive that reality, and suddenly there's a huge force towards remote working. And I think identity and access management are critical to that. It's just one aspect of it. Those 5 elements that you need to identify, authenticate, validate, log and monitor every request for network access. And then I would add, understand the final disposition of what was access. Did you alter it from a CIA perspective or not? I think all of those are key. I think the challenge about doing that is its speed and scale. Because if you've got, Mohsen, I think in your environment, if you've got 8, 10, 12, 20 million connections or transactions, per minute, and you're working in a public cloud or a private cloud, that infrastructure's got to support that volume of business and has to deliver that enhanced customer experience. And so I think that with regards to identity and access management and applying those zero trust principles, there are lots of technologies and there are lots of ways of approaching it. There's no one product because it's not a product. It's a series of principles that you need to employ. I always say, start off first with understanding what you have is critical. What do you need to protect? And understanding who have elevated privileges, right? And are there any changes in that? And there are any number of ways you can lock that down and monitor that. And then progressively employ technologies, whether it is an appliance, whether it's a virtual machine, or whether it's cloud delivered like SASE, so that you can really understand everyone and anything, because I think there'll be more things than people requesting network access as we move forward. I'll stop with this little factoid. I read the research that suggests that moving forward, 85% of the data and computing generated will not be in those traditional applications and workloads that we have in our clouds and our data centers today. It's going to be the things that are on the edge. It'll be Mohsen's automated vehicle fleet. It'll be his smart factory. It'll be his smart supply chain. It'll be the ecosystems that are all IP enabled, generating a vast amount of data, of which 25% or so will only be sent back to the cloud. So IAM and zero trust principles, I would say, when you do it, focus on critical people, assets, those risk approaches. And then in a larger view, think about how you're going to apply that across an environment that is your traditional prem environment, your private cloud in your data center, public clouds, and then into the edges where not only your workers live and work, but also where your customers and the citizens all interact. So that's my take on how I would approach IAM and remote working. Mohsen, in your environment, why don't you tell us about what that means for your employees and your customers, right?
Yeah, so obviously since the pandemic, there is a lot of workforce that is working remotely. So, but this was not anything new for us. As with many other organizations, we always already had the infrastructure to support the remote workers. We already had the VPN. We already had our cloud. So many of us, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel was already turning as in, it was landed to us. The only thing that change in this scenario is the acceleration. So and the fact that yes, now we have a workforce that not only work through the VPN connection, but they potentially can go to offsite and sites that potentially were single factor. So one of the things that we had to actually start doing for all the remote workers, we had to introduce the concept of multi-factor authentication. So that had actually allowed us to enable a lot of the backend technology that otherwise would only be available under certain circumstances to only certain people. So this way we were allowed to actually open that up to, a more secure kind of a environment that people can securely log in and have access to the important assets that's behind the firewall. However, now they can go past the first step and, get in, and then what happens behind the firewall is actually the traditional security that we already have in place. So from the IAM point of view, yes, there is a lot of acceleration that is happening, but the concept and what you just mentioned about the assets and the way that we make sure that the right people have the right access, they're authorized to the right resources, they're authorized to the right assets, that has always been the case and will remain. So yes, there are different kind of pillars now that you need to take a look and make sure jumping from one edge to another, you have proper interface and you have proper connection. But at the end of the day, that other than acceleration and making sure that we do go back to that risk assessment portfolio that I mentioned at the beginning, we are basically on track with the solution that we already have in place.
That's awesome, because zero trust sounds so intuitive and elegant, right? But then when you start trying to do it to millions of simultaneous sessions, that's where it's the challenge.
That becomes a little bit bottlenecky.
Yeah. Hey, Sherry, in your environment, you've got such a disparate population of users with various levels of clearances and various levels of requirements on what they access. How are you addressing IAM and remote access in your environment?
Well, I think that for us, we have some pretty good tried and true practices already in place as far as who gets access to what and how those systems are segregated or whatnot. MFA, of course, is a huge factor for us. And then also, how we actually do all of our IAM compliance and regulatory checks internally, audits, whatnot. None of that stuff is really changing too much. I mean, in light of what we're doing right now, I think one of the biggest things is I would say the human element of IAM, especially with remote workers. How are we protecting that? Everybody's logging in through, of course, their own personal Wi-Fi networks. We have 10,000 IoT devices in our houses now, and everybody's got many connections all around. And then we've got our kids and our families and everybody all around us. So then, I look at that from the perspective of, we might be working from home, remote working, but then also how many people are listening in to what's happening around us. We could have our spouses on another call talking with their organization or another client when potentially they could be in the same room as you. So, I mean, there's a few things about that. So it's not only just access management for yourself, but then also be very mindful of your surroundings and what's happening around you. So those are really key things and a huge educational experience I think that we all must look at as far as our employees right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that it's interesting to know that going into the pandemic, we were seeing on average as an industry about a 4 to 5% failure rate in security awareness campaigns, right? 4 to 5% of our employees were consistently clicking on illegitimate links and things of that nature. It was very telling that in week 2 or 3 of the pandemic, there was an article that came out that showed that up to 18 to 22% of security staff from the vendor organizations were failing security awareness training. And these are security pros, right? But they're really working from home for the first time. And I thought it was very telling in that maybe those tests that were being taken because of compliance reasons were not really that effective. Is that people were multitasking, they answered questions, ABACAP, they passed the test, that was it. But did they really take those lessons to heart? And so I think you're right. Having multiple control factors is key, right?
And I think scope creep too. So I mean, when you're in the middle of a situation such as we've all been in the middle of in the last little while, like, do we necessarily have to increase any type of controls and give people access that they don't need? In some cases, we've had to shift as we move, and that is we're adapting as we go, and that is still about going back to the basic principles of IAM and security and making sure that those principles are still in place and that we're still effectively managing and reviewing that on a regular basis. So key.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of the same types of remarks. I mean, why on earth would you maintain public information inside of your perimeter? You can just easily move that into a cloud and then maintain what is critical, and you want to limit access within your perimeter. So yeah, all types of ways. Appreciate that. Bill, I am sure you've got some interesting ideas with regards to identity and access management, and how has this changed as you said in your 20 odd years that you've consistently been working from home, which like me meant you were actually working from the road. And so you had your own device or company provided device, you had all types of Wi-Fi availability, right?
Yep.
What are your thoughts about identity and access management specifically, or really about ensuring secure remote access?
Well, if you look at what's happened, let's take the last 10 years. Let's take the whole concept of there is no perimeter. Anybody who has a perimeter is probably shrinking it down to be their data center. So even in maybe Walmart's case, the perimeter is around the data center where the apps and the data are residing, and they're treating their users, for lack of a better term, as hostile. I mean, it's just simpler. That's the zero trust methodology. Treat everything as hostile, everything is compromised, and deal with it as it comes in. So that's been going on. We've seen a lot of digital transformation, the Zscalers, the Palo Altos out there building their work from anywhere, anytime. The one key, and this is why I left Zscaler 6 months ago and joined Securon, it's identity. One thing I heard over all these years was, hand me a SAML token and I will implement, and then put on whatever you'd like. The sandboxing, IDP, DLP, whatever you want. I'll investigate, I'll decrypt SSL, I'll log things, I'll have a response, I'll know how to do all this stuff after you hand me the SAML token that identifies the user, which, by the way, is the key to unlocking all of the complex things that Sherry's organization has built around those tried and tested and true processes for who gets access to what, why do they have access, when do they have access, all of those things, again, nailed down to the identity. And what we've seen as stuff moves out, right? So, John's got a whole bunch of stuff out in Salesforce. In the old days, when he had a data center, he would fire up a firewall, he'd put an IDS in front, or an IDP, or IPS in front, too many TLAs. IPS in front of it, maybe some DLP. He'd stick all those things there and he'd watch what's happening to that data. He doesn't have that anymore. He's got the tools that Salesforce gives him, right? And that's all he can do. He can't put anything around Salesforce in front. Maybe you can go to a CASB and intercept the SSL, decrypt it, watch what's happening, try to put some control there. But the last thing that we have, if you go to AWS as a whole, you can get some stuff. You can put some virtual machines in front of it. You can do some other things. You've got a little bit more control. And then if you've got your legacy stuff, maybe in your data center, you've got tons of perceived control, but tons of the ability to put things in and do stuff, right? So you've got all these different ways. And the thing about security is consistency.
Yeah.
If you do not apply your security consistency, you are golfing with, like, if I change my stance on every swing of the club, I will never get it right. I can have a slice. I can always have a slice as long as I swing, stand, and repeat. That's the thing about golf that I hate. It's so boring because you've got to do it over and over again. So you can accommodate for that slice. You can accommodate for that user that needs to have special access or what have you. But because everything's now out there, some's here, some is in infrastructure as a service, some is in software as a service, some is at home. We have no consistency. The only thing that we have consistency now is the user, because the users are ours. And we see this with our large customers. They will say, look, take the reporting, take the SMS, take the multi-factor, take the adaptive authentication. You're not taking my IDP. I'm not giving you the users. That part hasn't come yet, right? That's still a few years out, I think, where lots of people are willing to give up that control, because at that point, CISOs really have very little. But if you can at least identify the user, and this goes way past just 2FA or even MFA, we should now be in the world of adaptive authentication. And that would be around the aspect of taking telemetry off a device, pulling it, looking at it, understanding what situation I'm in, what risk level does that approach, and then applying the appropriate authentication at that point. Because if we keep piling stuff on again, our users will get frustrated. And what do? They find ways around it every single time, even if it comes down to grabbing a camera, taking a picture of the screen and working offline. We've seen them do these things. So we as security professionals have to balance usability with security, with risk. That is a dynamic identity policy that has to come out. So to me, IAM is the key that is being highlighted after the pandemic, right? Because when everybody went home, what did I have? I think it's Bill, because this username and password came in and two-factor came in. So I will assume it's Bill. I'm going to trust that it's Bill. Do I trust that it's Bill? And how do you continue to build on that? So absolute key. If you can do anything right, look at your identity and access management procedures currently, because also in times of stress and disruption, like when the pandemic happened and everybody started working from home, that was when threat actors started trying to inject themselves into the, oh yeah, it's Bob, I'm working from home and I need an account. And help desk people want to be helpful. Our support staff want to keep us working. Management was yelling, don't let the business slow down. So I'm guaranteeing people slipped through. They did it. It was a perfect time. If I were going to attack somebody, not saying I ever would, but if I were going to do it, that's exactly when I would do it. During that moment of disruption, confusion, panic, no procedures. Maybe there's very little procedure for everybody working from home. I can't check a device. There's no certificate. I can't decrypt the SSL, whatever it is, it happens. So as we go through this, one of the things we all got to do is like stop, drop, and roll now. We got to go back and start looking at who got access, what access they had, what identities were being provisioned.
Yeah, I think that's very true. In fact, one of the things that I saw consistently was the need to do a continuous risk and asset trust assessment, something called CARTA by Gartner of all things. But
they just refused to use zero trust because it was a Forrester term, right? So
well, yeah, right. That's kind
but
of.
I got to admit, CARTA is a better term, right? It's continuous. Right. Zero trust just says I don't trust my employees.
Yeah,
that's what the feeling is, and so much of this is emotional, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's true that trust has to be continually assessed, because what the research suggests that from my old shop at Verizon's, about 18% of the disruptions and breaches comes from insiders. And so, you're using proper elevated privileges and credentials to access things that maybe you shouldn't be accessing, but you're there. It looks legitimate, right?
Exactly.
So I think you have to continually assess the risk associated with every session. And the challenge has always been doing that at scale. One of the things I learned about from doing counterintelligence and data breaches, that your insider threat is not necessarily who you think it might be. And your preconceived notions about what an insider threat looks like, based on national origin, ethnicity, whatever, it really comes down to behavior. And so, absolutely, all those things come into.
And so often we assume insider threat is a willingful act.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. Half the time, these people don't know their machine's compromised. I just need you to take your box home, let me infect it, and let you walk it right back in. Yeah. Right. And once you walk in, you're inside.
So it was really telling, because during the NIST best practices recommendations, said that, you should assume that cyberspace is not only a multidimensional operating domain, but it's a hostile multidimensional operating domain. 100%. And that the elements of that ecosystem, the networks, the devices, even the endpoints that you have provisioned, or the BYOD endpoints that your employees are using or your customers are using from their insecure home networks.
And add to it, when 5G rolls out and networks in the office don't matter,
right?
Because I can get 100 gig off my, my cellular card in my laptop versus the 10 gig I'm getting. Where do we go? We go to the faster connection. It's easier. Simple. I'm not going to switch.
Yeah. So I think all those things are just going to accelerate, but identity and access management at the core of these things. Hey, John, why don't you tell us about what were your lessons on IAM as you implemented your cloud first, your digital first strategies, and enabled that remote working capability at your organization?
Well, so the security, as we said before, the security's always been front and center. And, we've made sure that we have VPN access, that we have authentication internally with Active Directory. We have authentication through Salesforce. We have authentication through AWS. We are using multi-factor authentication. So there's a lot of things that we have in place. They're not necessarily streamlined. This was one of the next things that we need to look at, is because you need to balance, because as Bill said, if we make it too difficult, people will figure out a quick way around it, right? The old Post-it note on your laptop with the password or the user ID and password. So our next step is to try and streamline some of these things, but it is that balance. How do you streamline it while not making it too easy for people to get in? And so Sherry had talked earlier about education. And you can put all of the controls in the world in place, but you're only as strong as your weakest link, and your employees are always your weakest link.
Easiest target. Yeah. Easiest target.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And
testing them.
I mean, I can give you an example with an organization that I worked at previously, that the accounts payable department, one of the girls in accounts payable got an email that said, please pay this invoice immediately. Double clicked on it, and guess what? It was a phishing attack, and it went, or a ransomware attack, and it went through. And not only did it encrypt all of the files on her machine, but it started encrypting all the files on the network.
Yeah.
And it is, people just don't understand how easy it is. And so it's the education. We're even talking about mock attacks, that we're going to set some things up, sending these fake emails in to see how many people do click on them, and to actually show them how easy it is for these things to happen. And I think that's really a big factor in this is, as I said, you can put in all kinds of systems in place to restrict access, but if you don't educate your staff, they're not going to work. So I kind of balance the money I spend between putting in the right systems and educating, and I'll call it testing our staff. And it's not because we don't trust them. It's all about education.
Yeah. I think it's very telling that a certain cybersecurity training institute that has 4 letters just announced that they had a breach that was a result of a phishing attack, right? So again, it goes to show you that even in cyber professionals, security professionals, we're human, things happen. And that's why I think having that robust array of tools, not just one tool or platform, but things that work in concert that give you visibility is ultimately. But then again, I also go back to basics, right? Backing up data.
Yes.
And making sure that the backups are aligned with your SLAs, right? So someone asked me,
you can recover from them,
right? So that
so many people back stuff up, and then they try to recover and go, "Oh, it's a 7-week recovery period. I'm out of business in 6."
Right.
That's not a good recovery.
Yeah, I think people are learning that the hard way. Is that when they say, "Oh, I'm that the malware, the whiteboard really doesn't affect me because I back things up." So, well, what was your interval for backing things up, and how long does it take for you to recover? And as you say, they're finding out that depending on their service provider and their contracts, or whether they understood that you should align your recovery and your backups to your SLAs.
Or the ransomware that actually decrypts on the fly for 31 days because a standard backup schedule is 30.
Right?
We've seen them all. The threat actors innovate beautifully.
Yeah.
They have some creative ideas.
That's why I say understand what your critical processes are, their underlying dependencies, and then you can align your control strategy. So, wow, we have only gone through 2 questions. So normally I do this at customer dinners at RSA, and it's a good time. So we've got about 10 odd minutes left. I'm going to do one more question, and it is about operations and incident response. And I'm going to ask each of you to give us your perspectives on where we are moving forward, all the changes and how we ensure humans are operating right. And the question, I'll answer it from a security operations center perspective. So your peers and the CISOs are telling you today that the adrenaline rush is over. They're pausing now. Their tier 3 SOC analysts are all right, because by the time things get handed to them, it's pretty mature. It's been triaged. It's been investigated. They can do that remotely. But what they're also telling me is that tier 1, tier 2 levels of investigations in the SOC and the fusion centers have reached the point of diminishing returns, because those tend to be folks who have less experience. They tend to be collaborative in nature. And so those side rooms where you could go into and whiteboard things and work things through and decide what this is are going to be challenges. And I think the answer to that has been, you're going to move to AI, and without tooting our own horn, I think go to NSS Labs and take a hard look at the various AI platforms out there and see whether they truly are delivering what they promise through their automation. Are they accelerating the accuracy of the analysis? Are they automating through playbooks? And how accurate are they? Because I think what we've seen is that in week 5 of our test, our AI, we began to demonstrate greater effectiveness than humans, because humans are indifferent, they're bad, or they're good. AI tends to be a uniform level, and if it's self-learning, it should be continually improving. At week 10, we saw that our AI virtual security analyst was the equivalent of 10 average security analysts. So those are the things I look at when I think about, how do I automate those mundane tasks, which are critical, and then progressively train my folks so that they do the elevated things, which they can do remotely. So I think SOC operations are in a period of transition right now. So Mohsen, I'll ask you from your own IT organization, answer it any way you want, but tell me, what are the things you're thinking about as we shift to remote working, and how do we optimize our workers?
Yeah, so from the incident response and point of view, obviously a lot of the assets that once used to be at the very controlled environment, nowadays users, they can print, they can do anything on their printer at home, and before you know it, those potential leakage could happen with the remote offices. So one of the things with incident response that you're doing more and more is one of the key aspects of incident response is testing and retesting and modifying your playbook according to the environment and the condition that you're facing. So with many of the industries, what I found when I talk to other leaders is they are afraid of doing a large scale testing for their incident response because they are not 100% sure exactly what's going to happen. So what we are doing in return, we are actually doing a smaller kind of testing rather than doing one that bring the whole company down. We are basically saying, oh, well, let's pick this area and get some confidence in that specific area. Once we have confidence and we have tested and retested and the playbook is their contact and all that is in order, then yes, we can bump it up one level and then do a test on a larger scale. So this way, you are never afraid as a product owner, as an infrastructure owner to do your testing. Before you would say, oh my gosh, no, I'm not going to do any testing because there is a lot at stake. When you bring down your incident response to a controlled environment, that has helped us tremendously to be able to land on a platform that the product owners are now much more confident of the product that they actually handle. So that in turn boils up to the main incident response for the whole organization, and all the smaller components, they all fall in place. So that's one thing that I think would be a welcome addition to all the incident response that happening after the pandemic.
Awesome. Hey, Sherry, what are your thoughts on IR and SOC operations now?
Well, I think that, in any situation, incident response has to be, modified on the fly and as the situation persists. So like we're in a completely different area of, how we do business now. And I mean, looking at the threat versus how we're actually going to handle that threat, looking at the assessment of everything, looking at your crown jewels and what's actually really, really important. And then, modifying your incident response and your activities for SOC to sort of look at things in a prioritized manner. So, when I say that, I'm like, there's times when we look at everything, we spend a lot of time, I guess, assessing things that may not be so important right now, where we have to go to more of the priority objectives. I think AI has a role, but then we also need the humans, and we need to look at everything from a different perspective. So how do we do incident response smarter? How do we make sure that we're actually effectively mitigating and learning from each of our situations that we have? So, again, too, if we're not learning and we're not actually changing how we actually react and mitigate, protect, and then change our processes as we go, we're going to be ineffective in the long run. So we need to always be on top of that and learn from that and keep going with what we actually know, but then also keeping in mind what it is you're actually protecting and what are the important things. I mean, again, to prioritization of incidents are so important. If you get 100 in a day, you're going to take those ones that are more damaging, and you're going to hopefully focus your attention on those, and the ones that are just more, this is more routine, which could be mitigated via AI or something else, does get done, but in the background. So it's a lot about, not chasing the squirrel,
Yeah.
You know, that you absolutely don't need to chase the actual, you know, the bear in this case, which I saw yesterday. I mean, you know, that's a lot more important in these cases. So I think we have to focus that, and we have to go back and keep thinking about some of those principles,
Yeah.
and being smarter in how we actually do our incident response. And then SOC operations, again, too, we're not necessarily going to have the same level of analysts and stuff on premises.
Yeah.
In place, we're going to be doing a lot of things remotely. So communication, so key.
Awesome.
So key. Building a great team and communicating is such a key thing right now.
Awesome. That must be a Canadian expression about chasing squirrels. I didn't get that, so I'm going to have to learn that one. Hey, Bill, what are your thoughts right now about incident response or security operations? How do we go about making changes given the new working environment?
Well, I think I'm in agreement. You know, AI's got a place. It really does, because just when you look at SOC operations as a whole, historically we were adverse to automated response because it tended to be a lot of false positives, and we shut stuff down and people yelled at us. But we've gotten way better at it. I think as long as you got mitigating controls over the automated response to ensure that you understand what's happening, right? So you don't just blanket carve out 80% of your level 1 tickets and never look at them. As long as you've got somebody who's doing assessments, random audit, pick and choose, whatever it is, something that keeps the AI honest or keeps the automated response, whether you're doing an MSSP and outsourcing the whole thing to somebody else, it's the same thing. Spending a lot of money on people to sit and look at little things all day, you get fatigue. So if they do it a long time and get good at it, they start to get bored with it and it doesn't work. Or they churn really fast, in which case you're always training them. They're always having to learn again, and it doesn't work very well. So I think it's perfect for it.
Yeah.
I think it has a really solid place in how we do a lot of the mundane. But again, never a silver bullet. Don't walk away from it and say, oh, I turned on AI, I'm good. You now have to, who watches the watcher? Somebody's got to watch the AI. Or I think it's August 28th is the rise of Skynet in 2020. So we've only got a couple weeks left on the earth.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Judgment Day is like August 28th this month.
August 28th. Is that when the next open seating at Franklin's is available?
Come down here. I'll show you better barbecue than Franklin's.
I'm sure. I go to County Line. I go to Fredericksburg, and sometimes I even go up to Lukenbach just because.
Oh, wow. All right. You're all over the place on that one. I love it.
It's the only good thing about business travel. Hey, some of you I know, we're almost at the end of our time. If you need to drop. I want to give John the last minute. I hate to do that, but hey, give us your thoughts about where we are with operations and the human element there.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, some of the big things that we've been running into has been, remote support. As I said, we've now gone everybody working remote. We need to be able to support them, and so we've been prioritizing. Take the key elements, make sure that we prioritize those, make sure that those are dealt with in a timely fashion. And quite frankly, we've been outsourcing some of our lower priority items to a third-party vendor that we use. So,
wow, that's awesome. Appreciate your time and everybody, Mohsen, Sherry, John, Bill. Awesome having you here. The hour has just flown by, and that's not even in the metric system, right? And so I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in person. I think I'm the only non-Canadian on board right now, even though you're in the U.S., Bill. I know.
No, I'm officially an American as well.
You're officially an American.
You're an American citizen in March. Literally, the weekend before the shutdown happened, I was sitting in the parking lot in San Antonio going, should I postpone this? Because I have to fly up to Toronto to do the women's cybersecurity event. Yeah. And I was like, no, I've come too far. I'm not postponing my ceremony. So I did it. They take your green card. You can't leave the country. Well, you can, but getting back is difficult. So I called the guys and said, can I literally phone this in? They went, yeah, sure. We'll set up a webinar or something. And got my citizenship, and then we shut the world down.
All right, so I've been given the hook. It's time for us to shut this down. Again, big thanks to all of you folks. Have a great day,
everybody.
Okay?
Such a pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.